Guys, that last video was so serious. I ended it like I was a goddamn philosopher or something. Let's do a quick reset back to Goofy. Monkey, look at this Redfall bug. Which one of these is Black Spider-Man? Hod Towered. Alright, I think we're good. Let's talk about some of the games I played. Here's the criteria I'm using. As always, let's start with some demos and small experiences. I played the demo for Worldless a few weeks ago, and it's definitely an interesting little game, but I don't think it's for me. It has a mix of real-time and turn-based combat. You have a short period of time where you attack and a short period of time to defend, but in those states you're performing real-time actions. As you progress through the demo, the enemies definitely get more complicated from both a moveset and design perspective, and the game's animations are very fluid. Everything feels like it's either pure light or pure shadow. But the game also feels a bit empty and very start and stop. You walk a bit in this slightly abstract world and then you come to a full stop and fight something in a static environment with very limited combat that feels overly controlled, and then you move on to the next thing. I do think the game will appeal to a certain type of player, just not me. This one's up in the air. Street Fighter's beta was pretty fun, unless you ask my brother, in which case every game is rigged and you're just gonna wait for Mortal Kombat instead. As not much of a fighting enthusiast myself, I very lightly dip my toe into this stuff on the odd lazy Sunday. This was a very welcoming experience that didn't feel overtuned, and I like all the new splash screen effects. The modern control scheme makes it really easy to pick up for newcomers. It simplifies your combos and specials, but it's also a bit more limiting than classic controls, which is where you eventually want to get to. I would recommend not staying on modern controls for too long because it might end up being a bit of a crutch. Fighting games aren't for everyone, so I'll say get to it eventually, but if you're looking for a new one, then you should put this near the top of your wish list. I played a good amount of Overcooked with my roommate's girlfriend because I'm going to steal her from him, and it's been a good time. This is something that you can really play with anyone, no matter their skill level, as long as neither of you have a temper. It's got a very low bar for entry, very goofy and frantic, but the level of collaboration and multitasking and planning involved on the fly keeps it consistently challenging. I don't love the choice to unlock levels only if you hit a certain star threshold. You get stars based on how well you perform in past levels, and you need a certain total amount of stars to continue. I feel like you should be able to play the levels a bit more casually if you want without it limiting your progression, but on the whole, the Overcooked games have nailed a stellar drop-in co-op experience. If you're looking for a nice co-op game, definitely put this at the top of your wish list. Florence is a short visual novel title that lasts a touch over an hour. It outlines a budding relationship between two people with small, simple game mechanics, like how their conversations are represented by puzzle pieces that seem kind of complicated and slow to piece together early on, but become increasingly simple as they become more comfortable with each other. I can't say I was as moved as I'm sure the game wanted me to be though, and I think as far as slice of life narratives go, this one was way too surface level and predictable. One of its main themes at the end didn't even really feel like it was persistent throughout the rest of the game also. I was surprised that was the point of all this. It was a small, inoffensive little wind-down game. It got great scores because it has this elegant presentation with its classy music and simple but eye-catching visuals, but it's a game that I'll most likely forget pretty soon. Maybe you should get to it eventually though. It's short and cheap enough to try out at some point. Ravenlok is not great. The pitch of this game is basically Alice in Voxel Land. I really hope nobody's made that joke before because that was like 90% of the reason I even played this game was to say that. This is like a 2-hour action-adventure game throughout this imaginative voxel art world. It's filled with interesting areas and characters and enemies, and for the most part looks pretty good. I think it would have benefited from some lighting and camera tweaks. I'd say that some things look drier or duller than they should, but the art style is still impressive. The issue is the gameplay. Its puzzles are so curated and boxed in that it feels like a game that was designed 25 years ago by a bunch of people who just learned what video games are. Combat's even worse somehow. It's spam central with some sort of annoying sound effects. They do try and bring in some spell variety, but it's really just not engaging to fight things. Even your dash, dude, like look at it. Have you ever seen a dash with erectile dysfunction? Cause you have now. The game does seem aimed at kids a little bit, but it's an interesting enough setting to appeal to all ages, and there's plenty of kids games that are also just good games. This one just can't get any of the basics right, and it ends up giving me echoes of Balan Wonderworld, but not quite as painful. I'd avoid this one. And last up in this section, I played a little bit of Heavenly Bodies, also with my roommate's girlfriend. She will soon be mine. Think of this one as co-op in space with another person. Moving around is your hardest task as you repair your space station, and it leads to a bunch of organically funny moments. There are slightly easier control schemes for new players, but it can be a bit trickier to get the hang of compared to something like Overcooked, and it's a little bit tough on the fingers if you play too long. I still enjoyed it. I wish I had online co-op so I could also play with my brother, but if you're looking for another couch co-op game, then you should definitely get to this one eventually. I watched all 3 Hangover movies for some reason. The thing about the Hangover movies is that Hangover 1 is Hangover 1, Hangover 2 is Hangover 1, and Hangover 3 is not even, like, I'm pretty sure nobody gets a hangover in that movie. It's like a hokey superhero film. I'll be honest, when I first watched the original Hangover like 5 years ago, I thought it was a bit overrated. The whole format is cool, but I didn't find it all that funny, and watching it today, yeah, I feel the same way. My life is thoroughly unchanged after watching these. American Psycho is a lot weirder than I thought it would be. It's very off-kilter and borderline random at times. I feel like 3 people could watch this movie and one would think it's a substanceless, disjointed mess, another would think it's some insightful look into society, and the last guy would just enjoy the insanity and goofy humor. I'm definitely in the last camp. It was a really entertaining movie that sort of lived in the Twilight Zone, and I loved scenes like when they're all comparing business cards and my guy starts stressing when he sees everyone else's. It's like a 5-minute scene where he starts sweating profusely at the background colors and fonts of these business cards that all look basically the exact same. It's kind of a hard movie to explain the appeal of, but it turned into a cult classic and an absolute meme factory, so if you haven't seen it, go give it a watch. Barry's final season dropped, and every time I watch this show, I forget how short the episodes are. Season 4 moved fast and chaotic, and it ended the same way. As far as the directing goes, this is probably my favorite season of the show, and Bill Hader absolutely killed it with the long, lingering shots that feel very un-Hollywood. There's one action scene in the finale especially that feels impressive for just how insanely stripped down it is. And as for how the narrative ends, I think it becomes incredibly emotionally detached, which is both a good and bad thing. It's an interesting phenomenon where the show is at its rawest and most emotional early on. That's where you learn to feel for these characters and it infuses the most comedy into those seasons, and then eventually it really pulls you away from all your feelings for them and it ends as a violent mess of consequence. It's unorthodox and ultimately gives the show a very distinct feel, but by toying with more conventional forms of storytelling early on and then stripping that away slowly, it can leave the show feeling a bit cold and distant near the end, which not everyone will like. As a whole, I think Barry is well worth a watch, and I definitely appreciate its approach to the narrative it told. Jedi Survivor, do I feel any different than I did when I reviewed it a few weeks ago? Not really. I'm glad other people seem to be enjoying this a lot more than me, but I just didn't feel like we got enough improvement with this one, and it exacerbated some of the first game's bigger problems. I do think it's indicative that we sort of collectively moved on from Survivor pretty quickly. After the first week, you really just don't hear people bringing it up much, but I don't know, maybe I'm projecting. It's an okay game, get to it eventually. If you want to know my full thoughts, go check out the review I made. Dusk is a retro FPS in a sea of retro FPSs. It's even more rudimentary looking than most, generally less complicated in terms of movement and combat. There's a few abilities, but don't be expecting ultra kill out of this. And it has a bit of a steep difficulty curve midway, so why is it so fun? I guess it's just nice to go back to the basics every once in a while, and its mix of very open and very closed off levels puts you in a rhythm of staying on your toes and reacting quickly and efficiently, and then letting loose with your full arsenal. It is very fun sniping dudes from a distance without all this visual clutter getting in your way. Now, if only I knew you were supposed to manually save the game before you lost all your progress, that would have been nice information to have. It's not my favorite retro FPS, but it's one of the more straightforward ones if you're looking for something a little less frenetic. It's not quite top of your wishlist worthy, but you should get to it eventually. Resident Evil 4 is another one with a full review on the channel. This is a rare survival horror game that really drew me in and kept me engaged all the way through. The levels actually give you room to breathe, the story is pretty interesting, combat isn't agonizingly slow, parry. It's just solid on all fronts. I can see how the original was generally considered to be the best Resident Evil. Resident Evil 4 is at the pinnacle of its genre. Again, if you want to see my thoughts on it, check out my review. Redfall. I don't even want to talk about this. I was legitimately excited to talk shit about this game when it came out, and I realized literally 10 seconds in how broken it was. My roommate and I needed to replay the prologue 4 times. I had the game crash, I saw the worst AI I've ever seen, I saw the worst frame drops I've ever seen, I had every gun in the game not load for me until I re-downloaded this 100GB piece of junk, I had a black screen with just the UI showing, I had textures that took 45 seconds to stop looking like they were in 30p, and I had a lot more. This is all in the first hour of playtime. I was gonna do a whole big video just dunking on it, and then it just sucked so much that it even took the fun out of making fun of it. Even when the game functions properly, which is hardly ever, it has terrible bosses, terrible combat, and a terrible open world. One of the emptiest I've ever encountered. Top to bottom, this game is dookie poo-poo. It made my life worse. The Big Sick is now one of my favorite movies. I guess technically you could call this a rom-com, but it takes a very different approach to the formula, focusing more on family and culture than the direct relationship between the guy and the girl. It's a very sweet, funny, at least partially true story that's pretty relatable to anybody who's ever had strict parents or has been in a relationship with somebody who does, and it's one of the only movies that's made me tear up out of just pure happiness near the end. Please watch this if you haven't, I don't want to spoil any more of it. Moving from one of my favorite movies to one of the worst seasons of television I've ever seen, I watched You Season 4. I don't have nearly enough time to explain why I hate this, but it further solidifies my thoughts that You should have lasted one season. Especially since the way they handled Joe as a character in seasons 2 and especially 3 and 4 make me like season 1 less on a rewatch. Season 4 is just stupid. It completely changes course and it's tongue-in-cheek about it, but that doesn't mean it's a good choice. The twists are brain-meltingly stupid. I didn't care about anyone involved. Most of the epiphanies this character has are just repeated from season 2, but worse and more cartoonish. I just don't get it. I mean, the show is very on the nose about names, so I'm pretty sure the whole point of naming the character Joe was the fact that he was some average Joe. He could be anyone on the street, anyone you know or brush shoulders with could secretly be this creepy dude with a nice guy persona. That was interesting. But the places they took him in season 4 completely undercut that. He winds up connected to some of the most powerful people in the world as the show continues to ruin the ethos of what I thought was a good premise at first. You has officially gotten bad enough that I will never recommend it to anyone ever. Guardians Volume 3 is an overall great closer to the series. It has some very creative moments of ingenuity from Peter and some inspired fight scenes, and of course the emotional center of these characters is at an all-time high. My biggest problem with it though was that it tried to be too emotional. There were one too many bait and switch deaths, one too many big action hero shots that made you feel triumphant, one too many come-to-Jesus moments where the characters realized their own or each other's true purpose. At some point it felt a bit forced. I still enjoyed the movie quite a bit. It's probably the overall best constructed MCU movie since Endgame. It's not my favorite since then, and not even the one I resonated with the most emotionally. I thought Wakanda Forever was an excellent depiction of grief, especially in very spiritual cultures, but it's obvious why this one is getting some of the most love in the recent MCU. And to close off the interludes, Succession Season 4. Jesus Christ. I haven't stopped thinking about this finale since it aired. There's so much to think about in terms of where these characters end up, so much interpretation with how they'll continue their lives. To keep it vague, there are characters that I could just as easily see moving into the happiest and freest moments of their lives as I could see them straight up killing themselves. Winners are actually losers, the central conceit of what so many of them wanted has fundamentally shifted, you see flashes of what could have been and why it could never happen. I still can't get over some of the parallels they drew between certain characters, and after seeing how it ends, I feel like rewatching it is going to be such an interesting experience. Life isn't clean and simple, business isn't clean and simple, so this was always going to be a bloodbath that didn't bend to the rule of any one character's desires, and pulling off an ending for that is insanely tough, but they managed to do it. This is definitely a top 5 TV show of all time for me. Rusted Moss is a Metroidvania that revolves around its grappling hook mechanics. Unlike most grapple hooks in games, this one's really elastic, so your momentum going into things is very important, and sections of the game have some serious skill requirements that I only barely managed to meet. There is combat, and it's pretty solid, and a lot of boss encounters require you to work around the arena with your grapple and super jumps while shooting them. It takes a lot of concentration to navigate the environment and take out the enemies at the same time. It's got a nice, simple art style, maybe left a bit to be desired in terms of world design. There isn't much that stood out location or art direction-wise, but it delivers on its concept and mechanics very well, and there's some extra challenge areas if you really want to master the game's movement. The last few months have been stacked with new Metroidvania releases, and I want to get some more of them, but this one was on the slightly shorter end at about 10 hours long, so I wanted to hop on it first. If you're looking for a mid-sized, high-quality Metroidvania, put this at the top of your wishlist. Crab Champions is a game made by the dude who made the Crab Rave meme, Real. This is an absurdly fun roguelike that reminds me of Risk of Rain. You can stack abilities and turn into an absolute crab unit, zipping and flipping around arenas at blazing speeds. The game's also only going to get more variety and content as it gets further into early access. It also supports co-op, which I haven't tried yet, but I'm sure that's a blast, and my hope is that the new content brings in a bit more enemy variety and new level variations, because right now I think I've only seen one parkour route, and the rest of the time you get either a set group of enemies to eliminate or a constant wave of them for a certain time limit. I have a lot of confidence in how this is shaking out already though. I feel like I could drop into this thing a couple of times a week for years. It could very well be near the top of the roguelike genre when it's done, but for now put it at the top of your wish list. I'm playing Darksiders 2 because my roommate is a big fan, and I'm only about a third of the way through right now, but generally my thoughts are pretty good hack and slash combat, the puzzle sections are a little bit long, but they're well made, it's got solid bosses, could have used a little bit more enemy variety at this point, and elements of it could have been streamlined. I don't really see the point of this semi-open world that doesn't let you do anything but take the most linear path. It does hold up gameplay-wise, but definitely not visually. My guess from just looking at it would have been that it came out around 2005 to 2008-ish, but it actually came out in 2012. It looks a little crusty for 2012. I still have a while to go, but I am going to try and finish it. I think it's a good enough game to complete at least. Side note, I hope Atlas Fallen is able to do a lot of what this game did, but obviously a little more modern with more enjoyable traversal. I'd be pretty happy if that's what we got out of this. I would get to Darksiders 2 eventually, especially if you enjoy hack and slash games. Curse of the Sea Rats is another Metroidvania I played last month, but it's not really anything to write home about. Full disclosure, I did receive a game code from the publishers for this one. I was interested enough to give it a shot, and I played the demo at Steam Next Fest last year, which was okay. But even though it's not like broken or terrible or anything, it just doesn't do anything to stand out in a genre that has so many amazing titles. The gameplay is stiff, the visuals are fine but not that exciting, the setting's alright, the bosses aren't very tough or complex. There is a bit of humor and personality to be found here, which is a welcome sight, and the game's pretty short and easy to navigate for a Metroidvania as well. It is the boiled down essence of this genre, but it just has none of the flair, and when you look around at the games that you could be playing instead, I just don't know if Curse of the Sea Rats makes a case for itself over those. Again, it's not bad though, this one's up in the air. And finally, Planet of Lana. This is a cinematic platformer a la Playdead. I know they didn't invent cinematic platformers or anything, but it's clear this game took heavy inspiration from Playdead's style, from the direction to the narrative devices to the focus on technology and otherworldly events and creatures, etc. It has this gorgeous watercolor aesthetic that feels a lot cozier and inviting than some of those more intense cinematic platformers out there, and the music and sound design are beautiful and fitting from start to finish. It's around 4 hours long, and I found myself comparing it to Somerville a lot just because that was the most recent game I played with this style. Somerville had some technical issues that definitely dulled my experience on it, and it swung for the fences a little bit and missed a few hits, whereas Planet of Lana I think plays it a lot safer, but is far more consistent in its puzzle design, world design, and overall story. It didn't land with me quite enough to say go put this at the top of your wishlist, get to it as soon as possible kind of thing, but whenever you're looking for a nice, peaceful, but still engaging playthrough of a beautiful game, you should get to this eventually. That's everything I played in April and May. Let me know what you guys played in the last few months, what I should play next. If you enjoyed the video, leave it a like. If you're new here, subscribe, join the Discord, it's in the description, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.